Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shahad Aleissa. Today we're going to talk about a very interesting topic titled Graphic Design Meets Programming. But before we get into it, first of all, I would introduce this week's sponsor for our Google Developer Student Clubs, Biscuit and Cream. They have generously offered us the chance to give 3 of you some gift cards at the end of our little competition in this workshop, and I'm hoping that you're looking forward to that. So let's get started. First of all, I'll give you a little introduction on our topic today, and then we're going to go straight ahead to some questions that might come up to your mind as to how programming and graphic design actually meet, and to the most interesting part personally, which is working with P5. I'll give you like a brief introduction on what P5 actually is and some live coding. And like I mentioned earlier, we're going to have a little competition at the end of this workshop. So let's get started. As programmers, we've always studied that coding is actually a creative process, and it is like it gives us a problem that we need to find a solution for. And sometimes there are hundreds, even millions of solutions. And the sole factor of choosing a solution relies on how creative of a programmer you are. Therefore, programmers or designers in general that really like art have always been wanting to experiment. So they started exploring something that is called creative coding that we'll be discussing more about today. And now to some of the questions that might come up to your mind when you hear programming and graphic design in one sentence. How can programming and graphic design actually meet? Another question that might come up is, what is the difference between web development and graphic design? There are indeed a lot of similarities between web development and graphic design that we'll be talking about today. But also there are some differences. One difference is graphic design is permanent, meaning that when you create a work of graphic design, it is there. It's not as modifiable as a web development project, for example, like a website or an app. It's not as flexible, not as modifiable. Another difference is that a graphic designer has little to no limitation when creating the work itself. Meaning, for example, if a graphic designer chooses to create a piece of typography, for example, he has all the freedom in choosing the width, the height, the font, and the color. Unlike web developers, they have more concerns about DPIs, which is dot per inch, how clear a picture can look on a website, and maybe some concerns about file loads. Another difference is that the works of graphic design are static, meaning that if you create a logo, for example, and you print it out, it's there. You cannot quite interact with it as you can interact with a web development project. Like again, web pages and apps, they are more interactive. When a user presses a button, it can take him to another page, it can pop a message, and much more. Another difference with web development that it requires more ongoing follow-ups. I'm not saying that graphic design does not require as much follow-up, it does, but usually the follow-ups are a part of what a web developer actually does. But a graphic designer, it's his choice whether he wants to follow up on modifying a logo, for example, or not. Now let's move to some similarities. Both graphic designers and web developers have to master design fundamentals, as well as both of them have to have some creative problem solving. They need to understand the problems that their customers ask from them and produce a creative solution. More about customers, both graphic designers and web developers need to develop good communication skills to understand the needs and wants of their customers and create a creative solution that helps with their problem. Now more about creative code and how can we actually creatively code. We can creatively code with the programming languages that we all know and love. For example, Python and JavaScript are one of the most common programming languages used with creative coding, as well as markup languages like HTML and CSS. And today we'll be exploring with JavaScript in particular and some HTML and CSS. Now more to the interesting topic, which is working with P5. But before we get into the live code and everything, I want to give you a little introduction on what P5 actually is. P5.js is an abbreviation for JavaScript. It's a JavaScript library for creative coding with a focus on making code accessible and inclusive for artists, designers, educators, beginners, and literally anyone else. The type of art that is created by P5 is called generative art. And generative art basically is a form of art that is created by an autonomous system. It can be with some human help or non-human help. And we will see while we code what does this actually mean. And here are some examples of generative art that will be creating something that is similar to today. All of these have been created through code, and we'll be creating something that is somewhat similar to that. So let's get started. So here's the interface for P5. And the first thing that you notice are these two functions. And I'll be explaining each and every one of them and what do they actually mean. Just a second. Okay, here we go. So this is what you're gonna first look up when you open P5. And another reason why I chose to work with P5 today, it's because it's very convenient. You don't need a special IDE, you don't need to download anything. It's a web editor and you can see your work immediately. So let's get back to the functions. Here, function setup and function draw. Function setup right here is only being called one time by the P5 library. While the function draw, it is kind of being called forever, but technically it is being called 60 times per second. That allows us to create animations and GIFs and cool things like that. And the second thing that you notice is we have some more functions inside of our main functions right here. This function, create canvas, it helps us create a panel that we can place our objects on top of. This canvas is like literally a canvas that we can draw on. And its parameters is the height and width that we choose our canvas to be. And right here, the function background basically specifies the color of the background that we want. We can insert a range between 0 and 255 for the colors that we want, or we can basically just write between brackets the color that we want. For example, white. And that is going to give me a white background. So right now, I'm going to teach you how to create a canvas that you can draw on, basically. In order to do that, I will be using a circle shape. And by the way, P5 has an amazing reference page that you can basically just look up some examples. If you are lost, you can look up what kind of parameters the method you want to use takes. For example, we will be using the circle method, and its parameters is the X coordinate and the Y coordinate of the circle, of where the circle is going to be, and the diameter of the circle. So I'll be creating a circle with X and Y coordinates and the diameter for my circle. And as you can see, my circle has been created. Right now, my circle is not moving anywhere. So in order for me to allow my mouse to be the one that is responsible for my X and Y coordinates, I'll be using a variable that is provided by P5 called mouse X for my X coordinate and mouse Y for my Y coordinate. And when I run, as you can see, As I move my mouse, my circle is moving. Right now, you cannot really see how I'm drawing. And this is because my background function right here is placed in my function draw. And like I said, this function is being called 60 times per second, meaning that every time I move, the background is being painted over the circle. So in order to see the trace of my circle, I'm just gonna move my background to my function setup. And when I run, as you can see, I can draw things right now and create awesome shapes and awesome lines with my circle. And to make this less dull, let's create some color. To create color, I'm going to use my function fill. And the function fill takes in RGB values as parameters, red, green, and blue hues. So, or you can just type in the name of the color that you want, for example, blue. And there you have a blue circle that you can draw with. To make this a little bit more interesting, I'll be using the RGB values, and I will specify a range for these values to give me a really cool gradient. So I'm going to create two variables for my red hues and my green hues. And for my red, I'll be using a function called the map function. The map function allows me to remap a number throughout a certain range. The map function takes in 5 parameters. The first one is my input, as you can see here in the reference. The first parameter is the incoming value. The second one is the lower bound of my current range. And the third is the upper bound. And then the fourth is my target. And the fifth is finally basically the output or the end of my range. So to make more sense of this, my input is the thing that I'm drawing with. So technically I'm drawing with my mouse here. So I'll be using my mouse X as my input. And I want this to start at 0. And because I am using my mouse X, I'm going in the width of my canvas. Therefore, I'll be using the width of the canvas, and P5 allows us to just use the variable width that takes in the width of our canvas. And I also want to start at 0. And I want to take in the entire range of my red hues. And just like that, you've created something that could give you a range of colors. And I'm going to do the exact same thing with my green hues, except I'll be using my mouse Y. And when I use my mouse Y, something else is going to change. I'm going to start using the height of my canvas instead of my width, because I'm going vertically around the Y axis. So inside my fill, instead of my typing in a value for my red hues, I'm just going to type in my R variable and my green variable. And for my blues, I'm just going to take the entire range. And once I hit run and I move towards my width or my x-axis, you can see I've created a range. And when I go through my y-axis, I've also created a range. And when I go in, it creates this cool kind of gradient. And you can just draw things around like this and create your own piece of art. You can take up a screenshot if you just draw something that you like, or I'll teach you how to create a function that allows you to save the canvas, because also P5 allows you to save your canvas. So in order to do that, we'll create a function called key pressed, for example. And inside of it, there's an if statement, and I can type in key, which is a variable that takes in which key I'm pressing. And if I press S, for example, I'm going to save my canvas. Save canvas takes in the name of the file you want to save your picture as. For example, I want to save my picture as a PBJ file. And once I hit and I draw something, And just be sure that you're clicking on your canvas and you press X. And I don't know if you can see, but the picture has been saved on my computer. And this is how you create just a simple piece of art. There's another cool idea to create something that is generative. There's an artist called Victor Varsley that creates pieces that look like this. He started before creative coding was even a thing, and before he realized this actually could be made into code. So we'll be trying to create this today. And I'm gonna go from this right here. We're not gonna change a lot. We're still gonna use a circle, and we're gonna need some shape. We're gonna do a rectangle. In order to do that, right here, I'll be creating a color, for example, for my rectangle. Let's say gray. And I'll be creating a rectangle. And the rectangle is also a function available by P5. And the parameters for it is the X and Y coordinate and the width and height of our rectangle. So let's say I want it to be 50, 50. And I'm also gonna take out my mouse X and mouse Y variable. I don't need to be the one who's drawing the circle. So we're gonna change the diameter a little bit. So I'm also gonna make this a 100. And as you can see, I've created a rectangle and a circle, but my rectangle right here is not in the center. It is because the rectangle in P5 is not the default position of the rectangle in P5 is not the center. So I need to make sure it is in the center by using a method called rect mode that is in the center of the page. And when I run again, as you can see, right now we have the initial shape. And right now, what I need to do is regenerate these shape as random colors like you've seen right here in this picture. So what I need to do is I'm gonna keep my red and green values. I'm just gonna change my input right here. And what I need to do is I'm going to create other variables, for example, X, Y. I'm gonna use them as my X and Y, my input for my range of colors right here. I'm going to initialize them in order to avoid errors. And then I'm also going to replace my fills with it. Something that we need to do is also we need to create other random colors for the circle, because as you've seen in the art that we're trying to follow right here, the rectangle and the shape inside of it are different colors. So this is why I'm doing two different ranges. So right here, for example, I'm gonna start from 50, here from 100, let's say 60. We're just experimenting. All of this is just a little journey that we're going through together. So once I press, as you can see, every time I press, it's going to change. Here, we did not really change it. And now it's changing. So right now, we haven't started to generate other shapes. So in order to do that, we need to keep updating our X and Y positions here in our circle and our rectangle. And in order to do that, I will still be using my X and Y coordinates because I also want my colors to be changing. So I don't really mind using the same variables. So in order to do that, I will be updating my X variable. And to ensure change, I'm going to multiply my x coordinate in my circle and my rectangle by x. And as you can see, it moved on its own. I'm going to show you a prepared code so you could see what is actually happening. So right here, we want to create something that looks like this. We want this to keep generating. So as you can see, we have the full canvas prepared. And just like we did, we multiplied our x axes with the x variable that we declared, and we updated right here. And let's get back to our main. I think something went wrong. I need to be sure. Okay, cool. I know what's wrong. Oops. This should be inside of our function draw. Okay, now let's go. As you can see, our shapes are regenerating indeed, but not in the like correct order that we want. This means that our increment is not technically correct. Again, like I said, this is an experiment that we're all going through together. So let's try 2 right now and see if it's exactly as we want. And yes, it is. So right now, let's start incrementing our y variable. And let's go by 2 since we know that this is how our canvas is moving. And don't forget to multiply your y-axis. Oops. And there you go. We started noticing that our horizontal rows are not filling and it's just going downwards. This indicates that we need a condition. We need to fill in our horizontal rows first and then start filling the row after it. So let's put in a condition that if our x exceeds a certain number, let's say 5, we'd start incrementing our y's and hit run. As you can see, it is going down, meaning we need to increment our x a little more so we fill the entire row. And we need to do a little bit of math right here. Since our x starts with 1 and we're incrementing by 2, meaning the x here is 3, and then the x here is 5, and then the x here is 7, meaning we need to stop when our x reaches 7. And just like that, we filled the first row. And in order to fill this a little bit slower, let's use something called frame rate and put it at 3. And this frame rate basically controls the speed of our function draw. Like I said, it's being called 60 times per second. So this means now it's slower, it's filling up slower. So I also don't want these colors to be as static. So I'm going to show you another way to create your hues using a function called random. Random takes in a range, meaning between 2 numbers. So I'm going to create a range between 40, let's say, and 250. Same thing with my green hues. Let's create between 30 and the full range. Let's create a variable for our blue hues. To ensure we're going to have cool random colors each time we run our program. Let's say 20. And if you guys have any idea, I am listening and seeing the chat and everything. And we're just going to change our blue hues and our fill to our P variable. I'll do the exact same thing for my circle, but I'm going to change the range right here. From 0 to, and here let's go from 15 up to 99. And now when we hit run, we have random colors. Okay, now, why is the second row not filling? This is because it is going down, as we have seen previously when we stopped at 5 right here. When we stopped at 5, it is going down, but right now it is going down outside of our canvas. So what we need to do is position our X at the initial point, meaning reinitialize our X to be 1. And as you can see, our canvas is filling up. And every time that we run this program, we have random colors due to us initializing our hues as random variables. And we can add something that is called no stroke to make it more neat. I don't want my circle and rectangle to have a stroke, for example. And let's make this faster. And here we have a piece that looks like this. And I have another, like I showed you in the beginning, where I have made my X and Y coordinates a little bit smaller. I've made my diameter a little bit smaller, same with my rectangle, and it gives me a shape that is similar to that. I did the exact same thing with the keep rest function, and this is it. And I hope you guys learned something cool today, and let's get back to our little competition. So the little competition that we have today is primarily up to you. We have 3 winners. And what I want you to do is I want you to try and create something with what you've learned today. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be sophisticated or anything. I just want to see what you guys have learned today. And there is some gift cards provided by Biscuits and Cream if you guys are interested. I would give you like 10 to 15 minutes so you can create something that is cool. If you have any questions, I am here. I'm open to answer anything. And thank you for listening. You're very welcome. So let's have a quick competition, and I want 3 of you guys to win today. So I'm going to show you a piece of some code that I have already explained, and I want you to tell me what is wrong with it and why it is not filling up. Y equals 1. Okay. Are you sure? Let's try. If y is equal 1. I don't think that this is going to fix it. So you're correct. You're in the right place. It is the if statement. Okay, you are correct. So fun, that's correct. We need to change the condition of our. Okay, I'm gonna save your name so they can contact you about the gift card. That is correct. Okay. Okay, I've modified the code again a little bit. I've changed my x to be 3. So right now, what do we need to change? This is the output. That is correct, Mariam. بس ناقص شيء. Okay, what do you think? No, the 2 is correct. Okay, I'm gonna give it to you, Mariam. Okay, let's try something that is a little bit easier. The last question. Okay, the last question. I have removed something from the code that caused this error. I have mentioned this while I was explaining. So what did I move? It's to give you a hint, it is in function setup. Okay. I'm gonna give it to Bushra because Safan already won. It's correct, it's rect mode. You need to place it at center. Correct. And there's something that I've changed, but that is correct. Okay, and that is it. I hope you guys learned something today, and you'll be contacted for the gift cards. Thank you so much for listening.